Hi, Jewish Studies Hybrid class. Rabbi Light here with a video for your viewing pleasure for the weekend right before Rosh Hashanah. You'll see two parts of this video. The first part is about our Torah study, and the second part will take us to Rosh Hashanah to prepare a little bit for our upcoming holiday. So first of all, one thing that some of the class was struggling with, or was about this word vihine tov me'od, and the idea that either death or evil could be kind of what is being talked about here as something that is positive. And the idea that evil is being brought up here is kind of an interesting one, because we're going to know something about the next story of when we talk about a Garden of Eden, and in that story there is a tree, and that tree is the tree of what, right? And so why is it that for some reason it's important for the Midrashim to come up with the very idea that death or evil or bad stuff is around, and it's noticed at this point, and it's actually acknowledged in a somewhat positive way, right? Because if we didn't have the idea of evil or death at this point, what is one of the claims that Adam and Eve could make when dealing with the tree that they will eventually eat from? Okay, so let's move on. And interestingly enough, right, we will see again in the next story that we will read right now that you'll see a phrase that says, "And vayitzer Adonai Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adam." And God, or Hashem Elohim created Adam from the dust from the earth. He calls it here humus from the earth. And normally this word vayitzer, liyatzer, means to form. But notice something that is different between this form of Hebrew and what is right here. Do you see what that difference is? Yes, so you should have noticed that there's one yud here and there are two yuds here. And the Midrash, which we see from the Talmud here, brings up that actually that question here, right? Drash, right? Rab Nachman bar Rav Chisda made a drash, and he said oh, sorry, you can't see it right here. Oh, sorry. It's being cut off from but it should say, right, what is the meaning of which is written, right? This phrase here, Bishnei Yudim. Do you see that? Two yuds right there. Two yuds right here. And Rav Chisda says, Rav Nachman bar Chisda says, Rav Chisda says, Bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Kadosh Baruch Hu means God, the Holy One, blessed be He, created Echad Yetzer Tov, Ve'echad Yetzer Ra. Shnei Yitzirim Bara HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Two types of creation does God create when God creates this person. He creates in this person a Yetzer Hara, a good side and a bad side, or a good tendency and a bad tendency or inclination. So again, we see this idea of, before even the idea of the tree of knowledge of good and evil comes in, we actually have the development of this idea that evil is among the garden. Okay, so now we're up to the second Perek Bet, the second chapter of Bereshit. But actually, we're already there because look at this. In the Torah, we actually, for some reason, chapter 2 begins right here, even though Shabbat is what's talked about here. Vayichulu hashamayim va'aretz. Some of you will recognize that from Kiddush on Friday night. But so isn't that interesting that for some reason now the breaks in chapters were not created by Jews. That was by a Christian nobleman who created the chapters of the Bible. And for some reason, they placed Shabbat in chapter 2. And it just brings up a big question of, is creation a 6-day or a 7-day process? Obviously, from the division right here, we have the 6 days of creation, new chapter, meaning that Shabbat is an independent and an independent day, not part of creation. But I want you to do me a favor and read the following, because this is what it says. Read it in English and make the case. Make the case, actually, that Shabbat is a created day as well, rather than a day that is the absence of creation. I mean, that there is debate, but I want you to make the case that actually something was created on the seventh day. Okay, good. So now what I'd like us to do is read chapter 2, and I'd like you, as we read through each piece, to kind of ask what's crying out at you from this story. And I will tell you that, first of all, we get a hint that something strange is going here already when we compare the very first pasuk of the book of the Torah with the very first pasuk of the second chapter, once we're dealing again with creation. So Shabbat is kind of on its own, but here we go. So Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, Elohim, God, created the heavens and the earth. Ela toldot hashamayim va'aretz bihi baram. I'm going to leave the toldot for you to translate in a minute, but these are the toldot of the heavens and the earth, as when God created them, when God was in the process of creating them. Biyom asot, on the day of God's doing. Adonai Elohim eretz v'shamayim. Be on the day of God's creating the earth and the heavens. So, do you see there are two problems? There are two differences in this story that hint at something different. Do you see what that is again? Okay, let me translate this again. These are the toldot of heavens and earth when God was creating them, on the day of God, of Hashem Elohim's doing the earth and the heavens. So what two problems do you see in that verse that point to something different going on? So I hope you saw that there is, first of all, a change in God's name from Elohim to adding this Yud He Vav He to the word Elohim. Secondly, there is a difference in the order of Shamayim and Aretz. Now we have Eretz first and Shamayim afterwards. So those are two things that should point to you and say, Dar Sheni, like we need to have a understanding. I need to kind of understand what's going on here. There's something different that this is pointing out that I'm supposed to be kind of awakened to already. So what is your sense of why a new name of God is being used? And actually, it's not a new name of God, but actually a new name of God is attached to the old name of God that we've seen. Secondly, we have a reversal of the order of what we're going to be of what we have here, not heavens and the earth, but Eretz v'shamayim. Okay, and also, right, we have this sense of, I would say here, biyom asot. That's something strange as well. On the day of God's creating. Okay, something interesting. Good. So let's just look at this. So here we had that great midrash of God kind of looking at all of the things of what God is, and God says, this was the God of Bereshit, of first chapter Bereshit, and now we're seeing that added to that is a different name of God, this Yud He Vav He name of God. So we recall that midrash that why might that name have been added to God? What might God have seen in chapter 1 that makes God now add the name Yud-Hey Vav-Hey, right, which personifies God's adjectives or God's qualities of forgiveness, mercy, and compassion. Why might that be needed in chapter 2? We might not be able to answer that yet, but maybe we will after we read chapter 2. So here we go. So I'm going to present this in parts, and then I'll give you a chance to write down informative, kind of any questions you have about these verses. So these are the toldot of the heavens and the earth. So the first thing I'd like you to do actually is go ahead and find out what that word toldot means. And let's just kind of go through how you would go about doing that. You would go to Sefaria. So I'm going to click on So I'm going to click on Sefaria. I happen to have it up here. I'm going to go to Tanakh, which is the Bible. I'm going to go to Genesis. I'm on chapter 2. I'm going to go to all right, so remember like what I said, there's Shabbat first. I'm going to go to verse 4. Here's that word toldot. I'm going to double click on that, and let's see what the translation of that is. Okay, I'm going back to my video, and here we'll go further. Okay, these are the toldot of the heavens and the earth. They're being created at the time of Hashem Elohim's, or Hashem, God's making of earth and heaven, right? That's how we said we would translate that. No bush of the field was yet on the earth, no plant of the field had yet sprung up, for Hashem, God, had not made it rain upon the earth. And there was no human, Adam, that's how it's in the Hebrew, to work the Adamah, the soil. But a mist would well up from the earth and water all the face of the ground. And Hashem, God, formed, there's that word Vayitzer with 2 yuds, the human, the dust of dust from the ground. He blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and humans became a living being. Hashem, God, placed a garden in Eden, a land of pleasure. That's what that's called, Eden. Eden is translated as land of pleasure in the east. Therefore he placed the human whom he had formed. And Hashem, God, caused to spring up from the ground every type of tree desirable to look at and good to eat, and the tree of life in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So what I'd like you to do is any questions you have about the psukim that we just read, please write down. So I'd love at least 3 questions. And one question I have for you is, tell me about that garden. Tell me about the positioning of the tree of life. Tell me about the positioning of the tree of knowing of good and evil. How would you draw the garden at this point? Okay. Now a river goes out from Eden to water the garden, and from there it divides and becomes 4 stream heads. Okay, I took out that part of those different streams, but then Hashem, God, took the human and set him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to guard it. And Hashem, God, commanded concerning the human, saying, from every other tree of the garden you may eat, yes, eat, achol tochel, but from the tree of knowing of good and evil you are not to eat from it, for on the day that you eat from it you must die, yes, die. I want to stop for a second and look at these 2 terms, eat, yes, eat, die, yes, die. You'll notice that these words, achol tochel, mot tamut. So these are interesting terms because they are called infinitive absolutes. You have a verb in its in its command form, and then a verb right afterwards in its future form. And typically, when we see words like this, achol tochal, mot yumat, then the way we're supposed to translate, they're supposed to look at them as intensifiers, meaning that either you will surely eat, you will surely die. And the way that Everett Fox here is translating it is almost like eat, yes, eat, right? Die, yes, die, right? So he's almost like a question mark after the first verb and a exclamation point after the second verb. So again, when we see these are intensifiers. Eat yetzit, or of the tree of the garden you may surely eat. All right, on the day that you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. So, what questions do you have about these psukim? Write them in write them in the question box. Okay, Hashem Elohim said, "It is not good for the human to be alone. I will make him a helper corresponding to him." And I'm sorry I didn't write down the word for that, but that word is ezer kenegdo, and we'll come back to that later. So Hashem, God, formed from the ground all the wildlife of the field and all the birds of the heavens, and brought each to the human to see what he would call it. And whatever the human called it as a living being, that became its name. The human called out names for all the herd animals and for the birds of the heavens and for all the wildlife of the field. But for the human there could not be found a helper corresponding to him, that ezer kenegdo. So actually that word ezer kenegdo should be up here too. I will make him a ezer kenegdo. Again, questions about that pasuk? Okay, next. So Hashem, God, caused a deep slumber to fall upon the human so that he slept. Then he took one of the ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. And Hashem, God, built the rib that he had taken from the human into a woman and brought her to the human. The human said, "This time she is it. Bone for my bone, flesh for my flesh. She shall be called woman Isha, for the man Ish she was taken. Therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh." Now the two of them, the human and the wife, were nude or naked. That word is arumim, plural for arum, yet they were not ashamed. And I bring that up because my final question to you here, the beginning of chapter 3, the next chapter is about the nachash, the snake. Now the snake was more arum than all the living things of the field that Hashem, God, had made. So what's going on here? What's the connection between the arum and rabum? How would you translate arum here? And I will tell you that a lot of translations say that word in chapter 3 means shrewd or crafty or cunning. Okay, let's move on. So what I'd like to do right now, for my last bit of time with you, is talk about Rosh Hashanah, and specifically to talk about the Torah reading that we read on Rosh Hashanah. So first of all, one thing that you need to know is that whenever we read Torah on a festival or on Shabbat, we read a bit of Torah, and we always read also a bit of something called the Haftorah. So what is the Haftorah? The Haftorah is is another story, a second story that doesn't come from the Torah, but comes from the Bible. And it usually comes from Nevi'im. So if you look here, Tanakh, or the Bible, is actually Tanakh is the Hebrew word for the Bible, and that is an acronym, each letter corresponding to a different third of the Bible. There's the Torah part, which we're going to be looking at a lot this year, the 5 books of Torah. There's Nevi'im, which are the prophets, and there's 2 parts of that. There's the history of Israel in the land until they're exiled, and books of prophecy. And then there's Ketuvim, or writings, which are Megillot that we read, like the book of Esther, like the book of Ruth, like the book of Lamentations, like the book of Ecclesiastes, which we read on different holidays. The Psalms are part of that. The book of Job is part of that as well. So on Shabbat, or on a festival, we always read the Torah, and we also read something from Nevi'im. And why is that? Probably there was a time in history, probably during the Hadrianic persecutions after the Second Temple was destroyed and Judaism was kind of outlawed, and Torah reading was outlawed, and they would have guards that kind of would check if Jews were reading the Torah. And the way Jews would get around that is they say, "Oh, we're not reading the Torah. We're reading from the prophets." And so what they would do is, and so they would be safe. And what they would do is that they would go ahead and pick a story from the prophets that in some way reminded us of the story from the Torah. So even though we weren't allowed to read Torah, we could hear the prophet story and be like, "Oh, I know what Torah story we're supposed to be reading right now." However, I want to bring up something that's interesting that we're going to look at a little bit later. This woman named Judy Klitzner, she wrote a book called Subversive Sequels in the Bible: How Biblical Stories Mine and Undermine Each Other. And her claim is that sometimes we see a story in the Torah, and then we'll see a story later on, either in the Torah or in the Bible, that in some way is subconsciously commenting on the Torah story itself. And I find that really fascinating, specifically with regards to Rosh Hashanah. Because on Rosh Hashanah, reading day one, we read in the Torah about Sarah giving birth. And the Haftorah that we read, right, the part of the Nevi'im, this part right here, well, that is not from the Torah. That is from the book of Samuel, Samuel number 1. And that tells the story about Hannah and the birth of her child. So we have two birth stories, but I have a sense that these two stories are very different. And I think we're supposed to learn something about the birth story, and Hannah's birth story. And Hannah's birth story is supposed to in some way give us a different message of what Rosh Hashanah is supposed to be like. So first of all, let's kind of think about what Rosh Hashanah is about. Rosh Hashanah is about opening ourselves, about saying, oh my goodness, look at how things are in my life. Look at what I have done wrong. Am I going to get into the book of life? There is little I can do. God, I need your help. Okay? And the birth story for Sarah is one of miracle, one of incredulity, right? One of Sarah laughs at the possibility that she can actually have a child. She has been, when the moment when Abraham has taken her as a wife, we hear already that she can't have a child. So we have a sense that having birth for Sarah is almost impossible. And here she is at 90 years old, told that she's going to have a baby. She laughs, and we read the first words of Rosh Hashanah Torah reading are Pakad et Sarah, and God remembers Sarah. Okay. What I'd like you to do now is to go ahead and read the story of Hannah. Read the story of Hannah's also barrenness and how she is unable to have a child and what she does to get that child. So the questions that I'll be asking is, right, so how is this similar to the Sarah story and that I just explained, and how is it in some way different than Sarah's story? Okay, and now what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus on three different parts of this story, and these all come from three different midrashim about what Hannah does. Okay, so the first is looking at these words, and she made this vow, O God of hosts, Adonai Tzivaot, or Hashem Tzivaot. And look at what the Midrash says about this. This is all taken, I got these from the Talmud, but it's clearly a set of Midrashim about Hannah. First of all, by the way, we learn, even before we get to these, we learn about Hannah as a prayer, a person who is a prayerful person, and we learn that actually she is a great prayer, and we're supposed to model our prayer today even after her prayer. So actually we learn the laws of prayer by what Hannah does. So read over this Midrash and explain actually what the Midrash is saying that Hannah is actually able to do. Okay, so Hannah makes a vow and calls God Hashem Tzivaot. And this Midrash is basically saying that Hannah, for the first time, we saw examples already in our Torah study of God looking in God's wardrobe and saying, what's the name of God that I should be using at this moment? So we saw God first picking Elohim. Then we saw God now changing that in chapter 2 to Hashem Elohim. But what's Hannah doing? That's right. Hannah is actually also looking and saying, what are names of God? Oh, there's the name of God. God, creator of so many things, Lord of hosts. And I'm going to basically use that name of God to, and the Midrash is basically saying that Hannah invents that name of God and basically says, I'm going to use a name for you, God, that you have to say yes to my request. It's a name that brings up the idea that, God, you make everything. So why not make something for me as well? Okay, number two, we saw the idea of the infinitive absolute. Mot yumat, you will surely die, or die, yes, die. And we saw the idea of the infinitive absolute in ochal tochal, eat, yes, eat. Here we see it here in see, yes, see. If you will see, yes, see. All right, so this is Hannah talking, Hannah praying to God. But check this out. Look at what the rabbis say. So instead of saying, if you see me, yes, see me, actually they make Hannah out to do the following. To say that this means, if you see me, that's great. But if not, then you will see what I am going to do. So here, Hannah is pleading to God. But here, what would you say that Hannah is doing? Okay. So it just so happens, what is Hannah doing here? She's making a threat. And the Midrash goes on to say, here is my threat. I happen to know that there's a rule in the Torah that talks about a man who accuses his wife of adultery. And if that happens in the Torah, then the Torah says that the man brings the woman to drink a concoction of water with a blessing in it from God that says, if you committed adultery, that bad things will happen. But the Torah also says, if you're actually found to be innocent, that you will have an increased ability to have a baby, right? And so Hannah basically says, this is what I'm going to do. If you don't do, God, what I want you to do and see me and see my anguish, then here's what I'm going to do. I am going to get my husband to accuse me. I'm going to manipulate law. I'm going to get my husband to accuse me of being an adulterer. I'm going to get him to bring me to the temple to do this sota ritual. And you're going to see that I'm going to be innocent, and that's going to allow me to have a baby. So basically, what am I doing? I know your law, God. I know your Torah, and I'm going to use it and manipulate it to make things come out for me. Okay. The final piece of this. So let me just ask, what does this make? Tell me about the Hannah that we now know after these two stories. The final piece of Hannah I want to tell you about is, it says, now Hannah was praying in her heart. But actually the Hebrew is al libo, on or about her heart. And check out this midrash here, because the midrash is basically saying the al doesn't mean in her heart, but about organs of her body. And Hannah goes around to each and every organ of her body and says, God, you made this for a purpose, and that purpose should be fulfilled. If there is a purpose for, if there is a purpose for every part of my body, then there should also be a purpose for my breasts as well. And if not, then God, you are basically making me a visible sign that what? Right? That your world doesn't work the way it should. That every part of my body wasn't here for a reason. So give me a child so I can show the purpose of my breasts as well. Okay? So, what I want to ask as my final question here is that we have a story of Sarah giving birth in the Torah. And that paints a story of miracle, a story of passivity, a story of Sarah not really doing anything to bring this about, but really saying it will never happen. Hannah's story of birth is a radically different story in the story of Hannah itself that we read, and in the way the Midrash comes in to show Hannah in an even different way. And if we were first to understand that the work of Rosh Hashanah is the work of Sarah's birth, and to approach God in the same way that Sarah might approach God and express thanksgiving, what is the work of Rosh Hashanah according to the story of Hannah, if we see it as a remaking of the Rosh Hashanah story? Okay, and that's it for today. Thanks, everyone.